Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Senator Espada certainly was appropriate in making reference to the legacy of Cesar Chavez and what he did in California. But I would respectfully submit that comparing California, and certainly California in the 1970s, and New York would be like comparing apples and oranges, or perhaps more appropriately, apples and grapes. They have very little in common, nor do the agricultural practices in either of the states have very little in common. California and a number of other states in the Midwest, some areas of the South, have large corporate farms. New York lacks for large corporate farms. New York's agricultural industry is based on small family farms, people barely getting by, people who have, in all likelihood, a legacy or a tradition that binds them to the earth, that binds them to the practice of farming. They're doing what their fathers did, they're doing perhaps what their grandfathers or their great-grandfathers did. The likelihood is, if they stood back and looked at their plight, the extremely high cost of electricity, property taxes, the vagaries of the weather. New York is not exactly a Sunbelt state. It's not California. It's certainly not the Southeast. New York is subject to weather. They would probably scratch their heads and say, why am I doing this? Now, the community I grew up in at one time was very heavily agricultural. And as the outflow from the metropolitan area came out, folks couldn't afford to hang on to their property and farm. Many of those farms right now are shopping strips, they're subdivisions, but I do have a number of farms in both the Dutchess County portion of my district and even more so in the Columbia County portion. Not a single solitary one of them is a corporate farm. Now, it's easy to use the expression dirt poor. Nobody's making a lot of money farming in my district. They're doing it because, in effect, is virtually their heritage. It's what they do. It's what they know how to do. When Senator Espada said, and I don't know how he got there, his assertion, if it's correct, is that it doesn't apply to 96% of the farms. Well, if that's the case, there's no need for this bill. Why would you need this bill if it doesn't apply to 96% of the farms? I mean, that's an oxymoron. So obviously it applies to more than 96% of the farms, and in fact, in your bill, you reduce from $20,000 to $6,250 the threshold per quarter for the payment of unemployment insurance, and I believe also workers' comp. Another burden on that poor farmer, the one who you imply is ravaging innocent women. When you say there's no intention to disrepudiate, it certainly seemed to me from your comments I didn't intend to hearing that that was one of the things that you at the very least were implying. And I would respectfully submit to you that when it comes to editorial boards, if in fact they've ever set foot on a farm, it's when they visited a friend's winery or perhaps their horse farm. The likelihood that they've ever set foot on a real farm is pretty slim. I'd say slim to none, particularly those who write for the New York City newspapers, who in all likelihood get the bends when they get north of the Bronx, unless they're visiting their friends in Westchester or in the Hamptons. And I'm not sure there's any farms left in either Westchester or the Hamptons, unless, of course, they're horse farms. This is about small business. Now, there is nothing that I have heard in my district, nor one single solitary complaint that I have received that says somehow or other the people who work in these farms are being abused. I've been to a number of farms to the extent that they have a modest number of temporary workers and some perhaps full-time workers. They certainly seem comfortable in their jobs. We have daycare centers that work with the children in my district. They work on these farms. There's every effort to try and accommodate the people who work on these farms, where in fact the farmer can afford to hire these people. So for those of you who haven't gotten north of the Bronx or haven't gotten beyond Westchester County, what you should do would be very enlightening, is to drive up to central New York, drive up to the Adirondacks, drive out to western New York. I was just in the Finger Lake region several weeks ago. Some lovely towns in the area. Disproportionate number of boarded up stores. Areas that certainly look like they desperately needed economic development, not really a formula or legislation that was going to detract from their economic well-being. The cornerstones of upstate New York historically were manufacturing and agriculture. Well, manufacturing at best is a shadow of its former self, and we won't delve into why that has happened. Farming remains a mainstay. And what you will do here will be, as I believe was mentioned a bit earlier, be part of a death knell, something akin to driving a stake through the heart of the agricultural industry in upstate New York. This is an issue that certainly has great popularity in the media. This is an issue that certainly can tug at heartstrings. But when people from my district first went north because they couldn't afford to farm in my district any longer, further north and further west, and when people move out of state if they want to continue to farm, because again, it's a heritage thing for many, we cannot continue to put obstacles in their paths. We cannot continue to create disincentives for them to do what has been part of their life. Who wants to get up at that god-awful hour in the morning and go and either work the fields or worry about bringing a harvest in, trying to beat the weather, worrying about when you have to milk your cows? There's no one in this room, with the possible exception of Senator Albertine, who knows what it's like, or if they knew what it was like, would be willing to do it. Oh, I take Senator Young also, I should mention. So why would you want to dance on the grave of upstate New York?
Senator,
I'll leave you with that. Why would you want to dance on the grave of upstate New York? Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Saland to be recorded in the negative.